Hello, my name is Nick Capicato. I'm a graduating master's student in the Columbia University London School of Economics dual degree in international history. And today I'll be speaking on my dissertation entitled Making Gymnastics American, German and Swedish Influences on Physical Education in the United States, 1880 to 1925. My work reinterprets the contributions of German-American turners and Swedish gymnastics experts to public school PE in this period, as curriculum shifted from prioritizing the physiological benefits of gymnastics to the moral values learned during play. Existing literature on this subject is produced by scholars in the field of sports studies, kinesiology, and physical education. The prevailing interpretation describes the late 19th century as a battle of the systems, in which proponents of various PE methods fiercely argued over whose teachings were best suited for American school children. The narrative concludes in the early 20th century, as regimented and foreign gymnastics lost the battle to American sports and games. I dispute the notion that turners and Swedish gymnastics experts were combative advocates of their systems whose methods were abandoned. Rather, I argue that from the 1890s onward, interactions in the field of physical education were largely collegial in nature. Proponents of German, Swedish, and American systems of physical education endorsed and borrowed from each other's work. Turners and Swedish gymnastics experts even adapted to American interests by incorporating more playing games into their curriculum and supported organizations such as the Playground Association of America. They were not enemies, but reformers working towards the common goal of improving school children's health. By the early 20th century, educators began prioritizing the moral traits learned during playing games over the physiological benefits of gymnastics. Supported by the work of early psychologists such as G. Stanley Hall, PE experts argued that muscular movements were expressions of human will that could be guided to shape the character of participants. For example, children who followed the rules of a game could gain a respect for authority. Politicians and social reformers alike viewed the democratic values of fair play and teamwork learned during organized play as a means of Americanizing immigrant youth and developing a generation of fit, morally upright citizens. I adopt historian Zachary Taylor's definition of Americanization here, a forced government-sponsored process of co-opting immigrants to act and think like an Anglo-Saxon. American draftees' poor performance on physical examinations during the First World War sparked greater government interest in PE. My analysis of under-referenced state curriculum syllabi passed between 1915 and 1925 demonstrates that PE was seen as children's patriotic duty for the strength of the nation. This patriotic PE drew from the exercises, equipment, and publications of turners and Swedish gymnastics experts. I argue that the exercises and ideology of German and Swedish gymnastics, therefore, lived on in American PE practices. In an era when the strength of the nation was connected to the health of its population, studying the use of PE for national preparedness and Americanization can inform historians' understanding of early 20th century citizenship formation. The use of gymnastics in U.S. schools was part of a wider transatlantic exchange of information in the second half of the 19th century, as American reformers adapted social policies from Northern and Western Europe to address the shared challenges posed by urban industrial living. My research remains relevant for the field today, as reformers continue to face issues of funding and time restraints first raised in the late 19th century. Public school attendance in the United States jumped from 5 million in 1865 to 15 million by 1900. The sedentary school day confined children to sit in overcrowded classrooms for hours each day. American educators dating back to Horace Mann had recognized the need to train the body alongside the mind. However, low budgets and time constraints led school boards to prioritize reading, writing, and arithmetic at the expense of students' physical recreation. Attempts to rectify this imbalance took place at the municipal level because the U.S. Bureau of Education did not have legislative authority over states' educational policy. Turners began advocating for public school PE in 1880 when the president of their national organization, the Nordamerikanische Turnerbund, called on members to help make gymnastics an American concept. Several thousand Turners had migrated to the United States in the decade following the failed 1848 revolution in Germany. They established societies called Turnverein, where they discussed social issues and practiced turnen, a system of exercise comprised of calisthenic-like free gymnastics and exercises on apparatus such as parallel and horizontal bars. The timing of their involvement in American PE is attributed to a shift in German Americans' understanding of their ethnic identity, from a separatist approach marked by isolation to a contributionist approach in which German Americans took in elements of American culture while sharing their own traditions with the nation. The 1880s also saw a peak in Swedish immigration to the United States. Baron Niels Posse arrived in Boston in 1886 after graduating from Stockholm's Royal Central Gymnastics Institute, where he was trained in Swedish gymnastics, a system of exercise that drew from early physiology research to equally develop the body through gymnastics, fencing, and stretches. Together with men such as Charles Einabuske and Norwegian Hartvig Nissen, Posse spread the benefits of Swedish gymnastics to Americans. Turners and Swedish gymnastics experts adapted their methods to suit the conditions of U.S. public schools, creating lessons that could be completed in the classroom to ensure school boards did not need to finance a gymnasium. They also established normal schools to provide the country with qualified instructors. As this chart demonstrates, by 1905, public schools in at least 86 cities and towns across 26 states used either German or Swedish gymnastics. Americans' positive reception of these gymnastics exercises was connected to fears that sedentary urban life and the mentally taxing nature of white-collar work was draining the vitality of so-called old stock Americans. Prominent figures such as Theodore Roosevelt and historian Brooks Adams argue that this could lead to the decay of U.S. civilization as a whole. As the next generation of leaders, the health of school children was pivotal to the well-being of the nation, and because racial theory of the time tied Scandinavians, Germans, and Anglo-Saxon Americans to a common ancestral lineage, German and Swedish gymnastics was deemed sufficiently advanced for use by American school children. Many educators first learned about the work of Turners and Swedish gymnastics experts at the 1889 Boston Conference in Interest of Physical Training, convened to determine what method of training was best suited for use in the city schools and to spark national action on PE. The meeting's 2,000 attendees included educators from across the United States, as well as several European countries. Posse and Turner Heinrich Metzner presented on their respective systems, highlighting gymnastics' positive reception in American schools in the decade prior, and the principles of anatomy and physiology that guided exercise selection. Furthermore, both presenters emphasized the fact that their gymnastics lessons did not bunch students into a single group, but tailored to each student's individual ability level to provide an inclusive environment. The event is frequently cited by scholarship as evidence of the battle of the systems. Yet my research demonstrates that responses to German and Swedish gymnastics were either positive or called for adaptations. In his conference address, foremost American PE expert Edward Hartwell stated that any attempt to improve the fragmented and defective methods of so-called American systems of PE would find a careful study of German and Swedish gymnastics to be indispensable. Several other speakers praised the advanced nature of these European methods. Opposition came from attendees who argued that Americans required a unique system of physical education. William Anderson, the founder of the Brooklyn Normal School of Physical Training, explained that while he had respect for German and Swedish gymnastics and drew from their methods in his own teachings, they would not suit Americans in their present form. Anderson claimed that Americans could improve upon German and Swedish gymnastics with their own ideas. In short, critics called for changes, not outright rejections. Even Posse and Metzner acknowledged that their lessons might need adaptations to be used by American school children. Yet, scholars such as Dr. Gertrude Pfister describe the events of the conference as considerable resistance to German gymnastics. But I do not believe calls for modification can be equated with resistance. The Battle of the Systems narrative offers limited use as an analytical framework. The timeframe during which PE reformers were supposedly in conflict is ambiguously outlined as the late 1800s into the early 20th century. Furthermore, it mischaracterizes relationships in the field. Physical education scholar Dr. Paula Welch describes the relationship between Turners and Swedish gymnastics experts as a bitter rivalry in which proponents of Swedish gymnastics criticized Turner's curriculum for lacking physiological principles. I do not deny that disagreements took place, but numerous positive exchanges occurred that are not currently acknowledged by scholarship. The use of the term battle by the historical actors involved is partially to blame for this current interpretation. But historians cannot adopt hyperbolized terminology of the period, such as battle, without determining if it reflected reality. By discussing the positive interactions of the field, I hope to shift the narrative on PE reformers from a group of combative ideologues towards one of collaborative colleagues. Commissioner of Education William T. Harris addressed the state of PE in an 1898 report, writing, "The warfare of the systems, which marked the discussions of physical training a few years ago, appeared to have practically died out, and heated disputes had given way to a more meaningful discussion." Yet if we follow Harris's words and search for so-called heated disputes several years prior to 1898, few exist. In 1895, Posse glowingly reviewed a book by Turner Carl Betts on physical training. He claimed gymnastics would prosper if there were more teachers like Betts, prioritizing his skills as an instructor over the system used, which Posse called a very secondary consideration. Betts himself acknowledged that he occasionally drew from Swedish gymnastics and also encouraged its use among educators. If we go several years prior to 1891, Turner George Broges, director of the Nordamerikanische Normal School, wrote that while he felt German gymnastics were the best system of physical education available, what mattered more was increasing Americans' interest in physical training. Because he encouraged educators to work together because the method of instruction pursued, as long as the instruction is given by well-trained and competent teachers, in Broges' mind signified little. Turner's and Swedish gymnastics experts' inclusion of play and games into their curriculum and collaboration with the Playground Association of America further counters the notion that these adaptable reformers were combative towards proponents of sport and games. They endorsed the moral value of play as complementing the physiological principles of gymnastics, so long as activities were inclusive and limited excessive competition. Carl Betts published a book on PE games which sold thousands of copies, and Clara Baer, a graduate of Posse's gymnasium school, created Newcomb, a game that is still played in PE classes to this day. Collectively, these examples counter the existing narrative on United States PE. By the 1890s, Turner's and Swedish gymnastics experts prioritized school children's health over the name of their systems and included play and games to appeal to American children. The creation of the Public School Athletic League and Playground Association of America by Luther Gulick in 1902 and 1906, respectively, signaled a shift in physical education, from emphasizing physical development to prioritizing the moral and social benefits of physical activity. Gulick and his colleagues increasingly viewed gymnastics as overly regimented and counter to students' natural instincts. They reasoned that with the guidance of trained play supervisors, children would learn the values of cooperation and obedience to authority during play and games, carrying these traits with them to adulthood to become ideal American citizens. Furthermore, social reformers believed that playing games could Americanize immigrant youth. Participating in sports such as baseball would help children to act and think like an Anglo-Saxon and facilitate their integration into society. Such strong-armed assimilation was connected to aforementioned fears of societal decline. Contemporaries viewed Southern and Eastern Europeans as less civilized than Anglo-Saxon Americans. Therefore, their increased immigration to the United States threatened to dilute the nation's racial stock and can contribute to so-called civilizational decay. The country's future hinged on successful Americanization, and the character-shaping nature of youth play would help accomplish this goal. Despite the Playground Association of America's view on gymnastics, Turner and Swedish gymnastics experts supported its efforts. Proponents of both systems attended the organization's national meetings and helped the PAA fill play supervisor vacancies on playgrounds. Turner's and Swedish gymnastics experts continued to teach PE in public schools into the 20th century. However, growing anti-immigrant sentiment and the alienation of German Americans during the First World War reduced both groups' influence in the field. Politicians' support for physical education in public schools increased after a 1917 War Department report found that 1 in 3 draftees examined had failed their physical examination. This statistic was cited countless times over the following 2 years as American organizations lobbied for federally funded PE. The arguments they employed used the same language of national racial improvement utilized before the war. Federal recognition of PE is seen in the 1919 Smith-Towner Bill, a congressional bill that included $20 million in state appropriations for PE programs and an additional $7.5 million for Americanization programs. The bill's author, Senator Hope Smith, described the provisions as an obligation to the country, arguing it was the government's responsibility to, quote, provide Americans with the necessary things that a man requires to meet his responsibility as a citizen. In short, Smith and others considered the physical and moral benefits of PE as part of citizenship formation. Sustaining the strength of the nation required strong children, and the democratic values at the core of American identity were instilled through fair play to Americanize immigrant youth. The bill received support, however, it was not brought to the congressional floor. Thankfully, PE reformers found greater success at the state level. From 1919 to 1921, 17 states passed legislation requiring PE in public schools, and 39 states mandated the subject by 1930. The content of states' curriculum syllabi varied greatly, contradicting existing literature which describes national developments in PE as nationally homogeneous. Moreover, all the syllabi I consulted reflect influences from German and Swedish gymnastics in their curriculum and/or sources, evidence that these once foreign systems had not lost to sports and games, but become a part of American recreational practices. Syllabi typically began with a definition of PE that referenced the strenuous nature of modern life and the use of PE for shaping character. This demonstrates lingering concerns over Anglo-Saxon vitality and reformers' use of PE for citizenship formation. Several syllabi address the importance of PE for the nation, such as Indiana Supervisor Henry Brown's preface, which says, "The state must guard the welfare of its youth. To this end, every boy and girl in Indiana should be impressed with the importance of proper physical training as a patriotic duty." Youth physical training was an expression of patriotism in his mind because a generation of healthy school children instilled with shared moral values would lead to a united, prosperous nation. All 10 syllabi I consulted prescribe some form of gymnastics exercise because, as Turner's and Swedish gymnastics experts stressed, play alone failed to address the physical imbalances that students develop during the sedentary school day, such as rounded shoulders or chronic backache. These slides compare illustrations of free gymnastics movements from state syllabi to Swedish or German gymnastics curriculum, demonstrating that Americans continue to draw from these systems when creating lessons. As this chart shows, Turner's and Swedish gymnastics, Turner's parallel and horizontal bars were used by high school students in California, Massachusetts, and Washington. The influence of Turner's and Swedish gymnastics experts is most explicit in the syllabi's reference section. 7 out of 10 I have consulted cite at least one work by a Turner or Swedish expert. The syllabi do not include the words Turner, Swedish, or German when referencing gymnastics, but the similarities in exercises and equipment, as well as direct citations of their work, demonstrate that Turner's and Swedish gymnastics experts influenced state PE curricula meant to shape school children into ideal American citizens. This suggests that German and Swedish gymnastics have become part of American recreational culture. Educators described PE as children's duty to the welfare of the United States in 1920. A century later, the Society of Health and Physical Education calls the subject the best hope for the shape of our nation. Turner's and Swedish gymnastics experts knew that sedentary living required that PE be given equal standing with other subjects. Yet educators continue to face the temporal and fiscal restraints of their predecessors. As of 2016, less than 1/3 of states had minimum time requirements for PE, and schools' median yearly PE budget was just $764. I hope my research serves as a reminder that well-rounded physical education is essential for teaching children lifelong health habits, knowledge that is important for both their future and addressing the public health challenges that face our country today. Thank you very much.